Previously on Dust Toll.
The Kimes family saga unfolded with a poor family trying to make ends meet in the rough, dusty oil fields of Oklahoma in the early years of the 20th century. After beginning with petty theft and small burglaries, the oldest boys, George and Matt, were given long prison sentences for a bank robbery and murder of a sheriff's deputy. However, only George faced time in the beginning, as Matt escaped and continued his crime spree, including more bold daylight bank robberies and another lawman gunned down, before finally being captured at the Grand Canyon. While he was on the run, his mother passed away after a long battle with cancer. After being recaptured, he was initially sentenced to death, but his sentence was reduced on appeal. With Matt now behind bars, trouble struck the Kimes family members who were on the outside. Their younger sister, Nellie, faced a murder charge after a wild night, but the charges were eventually dismissed. Their father, Cornelius, was killed by sheriff's deputies during a liquor raid, an event his daughters Nellie and Jackie both witnessed. Later, Nellie was the victim of a gunshot wound, which she said at first was accidentally inflicted by her younger sister while hunting, but she later admitted that her boyfriend George Noland had shot her during a quarrel. In the midst of that tragedy, the eldest Kimes sister, Lovey, died suddenly just days after giving birth to a daughter. The Kimes brothers, granted a special leave to attend their sister Lovey's funeral, became entangled in Noland's dramatic and fatal shooting, an incident shrouded in conflicting testimonies and lingering suspicions about their true role. Matthew Kimes then became an incredibly influential figure within the McAlester Penitentiary, managing the profitable canteen and even acting as a so-called warden over other inmates. He was granted numerous leaves to visit his family, often accompanied by guards. George's attempts at clemency, however, remained stalled. Their sisters, Nellie and Jackie, continued to make headlines, facing new charges for things like drunkenness and burglary. Matt was eventually granted a leave from prison after helping expose a prison drug ring, but he quickly became entangled again with criminal activity on the outside. His life of defiance ended not in a blaze of glory, but in a mundane traffic accident on December 1st, 1945, and he died from his injuries nearly 2 weeks later. That final sudden end of Matthew Kimes in a Little Rock hospital in December 1945 might have seemed like the closing chapter of the notorious Kimes family saga. But for his brother, George, still serving a seemingly endless sentence behind the grim walls of McAlester Penitentiary, and for his sisters, Nellie and Jackie, the echoes of their notorious lineage would continue to reverberate, shaping their lives in unexpected and often poignant ways. In this episode, we finish the story of the Kimes family, ending nearly 50 years after we began. This is Dust Toll, Episode 10, The Long Road Home. In the aftermath of Matt Kimes' death, many questions lingered, particularly regarding his alleged involvement in the Morton, Texas bank robbery. Mabel Bassett, Oklahoma's Commissioner of Charities and Corrections, publicly declared her belief that Matt Kimes was innocent of the Texas bank robbery and stated that there was no evidence whatever that he was there at the time. Further, she criticized the State Pardon and Parole Board for its method of handling Kimes' clemency from the state penitentiary. Bassett had spoken with Matt's brother George and his sister, Mrs. Nellie Ashford, about Matt's whereabouts on September 5th, the day of the robbery. She believed Kimes would have had a better chance to make good during his leave had he been given a steady job outside McAlester. When he was released, he was to have gone to work for George Wilburn, a McAlester auto dealer, but that job did not materialize. Subsequently, he worked for a short time with his brother-in-law, Jack Ashford, building trailers. Bassett also criticized the public release of information about Kimes aiding prison officials in breaking a narcotics ring, believing it made him a target and deterred him from surrendering. On March 3, 1946, the New York Daily News, a paper in New York City, published a comprehensive story titled, "What Happened to Justice? Oklahoma Bank Robber Proved Crime Does Pay, Up to a Point." The article, written by Ruth Reynolds, provided a detailed and often critical retrospective of Matthew Kimes' criminal career, suggesting that he seemed to prove crime does pay. The story begins by recounting Matt Kimes' daring jailbreak from the Sequoia County Jail in Sallisaw, Oklahoma. It describes how 4 cowboys, chatting genially, sauntered through the portals of the square little jail. Once inside, their demeanor changed. They trussed the surprised jailer at gunpoint, seized his keys, and freed Matt Kimes from his cell, where he was lounging smoking a cigar. The narrative implies Matt was aware of the rescue, noting that while the record doesn't explicitly state his surprise, your common sense will strongly indicate he was glad. The article then broadly summarizes the early criminal partnerships of Matt and George Kimes, noting that for the next 4 years, Matt and George took their money where they found it, and their fun when they had found the money. It mentions their initial bank robbery, where they only netted nickels. Just damn nickels, about 28 pounds of them. Despite oil town marshals gasping at their desperate deeds, and Cowtown newspaper editors writing, "This terrorization must be stopped," the law did not immediately scour the hills for them. The article highlights Matt's personal life, remarking on his youth. This young fellow hardly needed the honey of his tongue to win a wife at 19. It points out the irony of his wedding picture being promptly tacked up in every police station as a means of identifying Kimes. A significant portion of the story is dedicated to the deadly Sallisaw gunfight, emphasizing the Kimes brothers' ruthlessness. It details how Police Chief J.C. Wohl, Under Sheriff Bert Cotton, and Deputy Sheriff Perry Chucolate attempted to intercept the Kimes car. The article states that the holdup men beat officers to the draw, resulting in Chucolate falling dead in the dust and Cotton being wounded. Chief Wohl was taken hostage by George Kimes, and the editorial notes that Wohl was given every consideration during the 25-mile ride from the Sallisaw cutoff to Van Buren, Arkansas, before being dropped off and told to run along back home. It adds that the brothers, to whom murder seemed a simple thing, went on to visit Ma, now living in Van Buren. Following their capture after the Sallisaw incident, George Kimes was sentenced to 25 years in the state penitentiary at McAlester. Matthew, described as the gun wielder, was tried and convicted of murder and sentenced to 35 years in jail. However, the article points out a perceived flaw in Oklahoma justice, as Matt appealed and won a new trial. The article then narrates some of Matt Kimes' post-escape actions, stating that he first called on his wife and announced, "A man who lives by blood should live alone," interpreted as a desire to get unhitched. He then went home to see his dying mother. The story recounts an attempt by Matt's pals to offer a brand new car to the widow Chucolate as a peace offering gift for her husband's death, emphasizing that the car was legal paid for. The story also describes the incident where Matt inadvertently kidnapped a 2-year-old child. It notes that Mrs. Orville E. Noble, the child's mother, discovered the loss of her car and child, leading to the child's quick recovery and a renewed pursuit of Kimes. The narrative then moves to the capture of Town Marshal George McAnich in Jennings, Oklahoma. McAnich, with a friend, positioned his car to intercept Kimes. The editorial dramatically states that Kimes did stop when McAnich commanded him to stop in the name of the law. The article continues by detailing how Matt and George Kimes were granted permission to leave prison under guard to aid the police in dealing with George Noland. Nellie Kimes, their sister, was involved, and the brothers whispered a police-inspired proposition to Nellie at their sister Lovey Patton's funeral. Nellie fell right in with the plan, luring Noland into a trap where the police shot him dead. The story notes that the Kimes brothers then returned to prison, and Matt, basking in the warmth of official approval, was even granted a 6-day leave from prison to go quail hunting by Governor William Murray. Finally, the editorial shifts to Matt's appearance before the Oklahoma Parole Board in July 1945, suggesting he had every reason to believe he was due for a pardon. It mentions his parole report from October 29th, when he explained that his promised job wouldn't start until January 1946, and that he was building trailers for his brother-in-law, Jack Ashford, Nellie's husband, in the interim. His probation officer, Campbell LaFleur, complimented Kimes. However, the article then abruptly transitions to Matt's alleged involvement in the Morton, Texas bank robbery. It states that Matt Kimes and Olaf Alvin Chick Rogers of Tulsa were suspects, and Matt was not in McAlester despite his parole report. The story concludes with reports of Matt robbing a theater manager in Wewoka, and then sightings across Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, noting that this time no Keystone cops were after him. His pursuer was D.A. Jelly Bryce, FBI agent who could, some thought, outdraw and outshoot any man in the Southwest. Even after the dramatic and unexpected death of her brother, Matthew Kimes, Nellie Kimes Ashford found herself unable to escape the shadow of her family's notorious name. Her life continued to be marked by brushes with the law, from auto accidents to public intoxication, and even a tragic fire that consumed her home. Just a month after Matthew's death, Nellie Kimes Ashford was involved in a 2-car collision on U.S. Highway 270 south of Wewoka. She was a passenger in a car driven by her cousin, Lonnie Frank Poe, a 48-year-old from Stewart. Poe's car sideswiped a vehicle driven by Mrs. Theda Murray Franklin as Franklin was making a left turn into her home. Although no one was injured in the accident, both parties faced charges. Poe pleaded guilty to driving under the influence of intoxicating liquor, while Nellie Kimes Ashford pleaded guilty to being publicly drunk. Poe was fined $100 plus court costs, and Mrs. Ashford was fined $23 plus court costs. The incident brought further scrutiny to Poe, who was already on parole from McAlester State Prison for armed robbery and had a record of 4 previous convictions. On April 6, 1949, the country home of Jack and Nellie Ashford, known as Red Oaks and located just east of Bash, was completely destroyed by fire. The cause of the blaze was officially unknown. A public service employee, passing by around 4 o'clock in the morning, noticed the fire and reported it. The house was unoccupied at the time, as the Ashfords were reportedly in California. The passerby initially tried to rouse occupants, but, failing to do so, ran to the rear, opened the back door, and found the entire interior already ablaze. Deputy Sheriff Fite later confirmed that the modern 5-room residence and adjoining garage and living quarters were totally destroyed. The property was valued at an estimated $12,000. Notably, the home had only recently been leased to a McAlester couple who had not yet taken possession. Later that year, in November 1949, Nellie Ashford, identified as the former Nellie Kimes, once again pleaded guilty to a public drunkenness charge in Judge W.G. Beasley's Justice Court. She had been arrested on State Highway 68 north of Atwood. For this offense, she was fined $10 and court costs. The sheriff noted her continued public criticism of the Pardon and Parole Board for refusing to recommend a parole for her brother, George. These incidents underscore the continued, often tragic, public life of Nellie Kimes Ashford, as she navigated a world perpetually aware of her family's infamous legacy. Meanwhile, in February 1946, just 2 months after Matt's passing, George Kimes, then 42 years old, was working on hospital duty at McAlester Penitentiary, nursing 11 prisoners with tuberculosis. During this period, George openly shared his feelings and reflections about his brother and their intertwined past. George confessed he would not seek clemency during Governor Robert S. Kerr's administration, stating he, quote, "just don't have the nerve or heart to ask for clemency," end quote. This was largely due to the negative publicity surrounding Matt's controversial leave of absence, which George felt had hurt the other fellow's chances to get out of prison. He lamented that Matt did not make good on his freedom, expressing regret that his brother would have made good if he had not been forced to stay in McAlester. However, the Pardon and Parole Board clarified that Matt himself had requested to stay in McAlester due to employment and having more friends there. George firmly believed Matt was innocent of the Morton, Texas bank robbery, stating that his pals in prison did not believe that he did it either. He recalled that just before his final leave, Matt had visited him, revealing he was being followed by private detectives and planning to go straight. He acknowledged that Matt broke his clemency provisions by leaving the state, but regretted that his brother didn't have the opportunity to prove that he didn't rob that bank. George shared a poignant detail. Prisoners at McAlester had taken up a collection and purchased a big casket floral piece for Matt's burial, a gesture that brought George to tears. He also confirmed that he and his sisters, Nellie Ashford and Jackie Kimes Smith, received nothing from Matt's estate. Matt's car was sold, and his savings were consumed by funeral expenses, despite federal agents reporting $1,600 was in Matt's possession when he entered the Little Rock Hospital. George expressed a desire to plead with the Pardon and Parole Board to forget Matt's clemency case and not penalize other prisoners seeking freedom. He maintained a distant hope for his own release, aiming to prove to the people that a Kimes could make good, and planned to go back into the sticks to live and farm if he were freed. While George reflected on his brother and his own fate, he continued to cultivate an unexpected talent that brought him solace and recognition behind bars: painting. Although his artistic journey began before Matt's death, it flourished and became a defining aspect of his life in prison. As early as October 1935, George had turned artist with one of his paintings depicting a half-nude convict, a rock pile worker, who had thrown down his hammer in despair and stretched his arms heavenward in supplication, even displayed in an Oklahoma City art exhibit. This work was intended to portray a man who had lost all hope. By 1937, he was assisting in replacing murals in the prison mess hall. Matthew himself had noted in January 1938 that George was kind of temperamental, but painting kind of sobered him and helped him see things different now. George expressed that painting, quote, "rests me," end quote, and he intended to keep on painting and try to get somewhere with it. He was described as a serious-appearing, bespectacled young man who takes his painting seriously, having even copied Gainsborough's Blue Boy. In a poignant clemency letter written in July 1938, George described himself as pretty blue and said painting was all I knew to do. He acknowledged making a big improvement in his painting that year, and even received an offer for instruction from Oklahoma City artist Larry Pendleton. Even in 1956, years after Matt's death, George's latest project was painting with chalk and oil. He completed a picture of Governor Gary for the warden's office and another, the Good Shepherd, for the women's prison, and a third canvas was half finished. He fondly recalled winning a prize for an earlier painting depicting a convict on his knees, symbolizing a man paying his debt to society, with icy mountains illustrating outsiders' feelings towards prisoners. George profoundly explained the recurring theme in his art. All of my pictures have a sort of black sheep angle. I guess I'm always thinking of us fellows who have fallen by the wayside. This artistic expression provided a window into the mind of the man who bore 8 bullet scars from his criminal career, yet never revealed the names of his bank-robbing partners, a secret he maintained with stern determination. Despite his artistic endeavors and quiet demeanor, after more than 20 years behind bars, the lure of freedom proved too strong for George. On July 2, 1948, George Kimes, then 44 years old, walked away from the prison bloodhound kennels where he was a trustee. This marked his first time away from prison since 1926 without guards. Prison officials believed his escape was fueled by the memory of Matt's mistake, as George felt he was rotting and doing time for Matt's mistakes, and that the parole board continually brought up Matt's past when considering his own clemency. George confided in a close friend inside the walls. The parole board pointed out that Matt had made such a mess of his freedom, there was too much fire on the Kimes family. After becoming a trustee, he was assigned to the dog kennels. He took expert care of the bloodhounds and was considered by Warden Burford to be a model prisoner. 3 days before his escape, in a move later interpreted by guards as a clear sign of his impending flight, George gave his pet monkey, named Stinky, to his sister Nellie. After he escaped, bloodhounds lost his trail, and it was suspected that he got a ride from a passing motorist. George's escape from the prison grounds was meticulously planned. He had spent time training the dogs to lay confusing tracks, ensuring their renowned sense of smell would be thrown off. The minute he got away, he stripped off his prison clothes and donned fresh ones he'd hidden, leaving the old ones behind in a field to further mislead the hounds, which were trained to follow unfamiliar scents. For 3 days, he remained hidden in a grove of poplar trees near the penitentiary, surviving on several peanut butter sandwiches he had packed. At one point, he could hear the bloodhounds baying in the distance, but his trick had worked. Driven by hunger on the 3rd day, a desperate search for food led him behind a farmhouse, where he startlingly found himself in a den of rattlesnakes. He recounts having to stand real still about 10 minutes until they crawled away. Still famished, he stumbled into a cow pasture, found an old tobacco can, and managed to milk a cow for sustenance, though a large shepherd dog soon spied him and ran him off. On the 4th night, George finally made his way to a highway near McAlester, where he discreetly jumped on the back of a freight truck, riding unrecognized to a point near Oklahoma City. A small $25 reward was offered, a small fraction of what had once been offered for his brother, but no concentrated manhunt followed. Unlike Matt, George was not proud of his criminal career and actively avoided being pointed out to visitors, making him less well known than his flamboyant brother Matt had been. After George's latest escape, former convict Leonard Mayfield, the same Leonard Mayfield who had attempted to escape with George more than 20 years earlier, the one where George was shot 3 times. Now, Mayfield was working as a middleman between prison officials and Nellie to negotiate George's surrender. However, that plan fell apart when Mayfield was killed after being shot twice by a Collinsville man during a fight while drinking with a friend, even while a prison guard who was present assisting with the plans looked on. George Kimes was finally captured on June 7, 1949, almost a year after escaping, in Burns, Oregon, following a tip from a fellow workman. He had been living in southeast Oregon since the fall of the previous year, working as a logger and selling vacuum cleaners. When he was finally captured, the tough exterior he often presented crumbled. He wept bitterly, admitting he had lost his nerve and couldn't keep a stiff upper lip, profoundly impacted by his 11 months where it was so nice to live out here in the free world. He believed he had made good during that time. His latest wife, Fern, an Assembly of God preacher whom he had married several years ago during a brief leave from prison, was also present, crying softly. She expressed her belief that God has willed that he go back to serve the rest of his sentence, emphasizing that George was not bad now, merely a wild, impulsive kid who got into trouble. In fact, just the day before his capture, George had joined the Assembly of God Church and was baptized during a community service at a river. This spiritual transformation offered him renewed hope. He hadn't lost hope after finding religion, and he believed that the man upstairs will see that I get one if I treat him right. Upon apprehension, George readily admitted his identity and was noted to have a good reputation in Oregon, with local businessmen and the sheriff even writing to the warden seeking a parole for him, citing his marriage and regular church attendance. George himself articulated his reasons for escaping, stating he had left because he felt he didn't figure I got a square deal. He pointed out that many other convicts, even those with life sentences for murder, who had entered prison after him, had already been paroled. He believed that his 11 months of living and working freely in Oregon, under an assumed name, was proof that he could go straight, and he desired the parole board to consider this. Despite the setback, he affirmed his commitment to being a model prisoner and expressed readiness to take the punishment of solitary confinement, saying he was man enough to pay for his actions. He continued to maintain his innocence in Perry Chukolit's killing, claiming the deputy was killed in crossfire and he did not fire a shot, asserting he was convicted because feeling was running high. He again promised to be a model prisoner upon his return. As punishment for his escape, George was sentenced to at least 6 months in solitary confinement. Despite this, in September 1949, George won an award in the annual prison rodeo. In December 1950, 2 more years were added to his sentence for the escape. George continued his long incarceration. His original 25-year sentence for manslaughter was effectively served in 12 calendar years, but he then began a 50-year sentence for armed robbery from 1938. In 1952, he made another clemency plea supported by the warden and Lieutenant Governor James Berry, highlighting his model prisoner status and the fact that he had completed his sentence for the deputy sheriff slaying more than 10 years ago. He expressed his long-held desire for freedom, stating, "It has been a long time since I walked through those front gates at this prison. Maybe I will get it, and maybe I won't. We will just have to wait and see." Finally, 5 years later, after 31 years in prison, George Kimes was released on parole by Governor Raymond Gary in May 1957. This parole was granted on the promise of Owen Lawson, a Tulsa labor union official and cattleman, who offered George a job managing an 1,800-acre ranch in Rogers County. George expressed immense gratitude for the opportunity, stating he would bend over backwards to make good, and reflecting, "I was a crazy kid when I came here. Now I'm an old man. I just got in with the wrong gang." He also acknowledged the personal cost of his past, stating, "If they only knew what a brief crime spree has done to my life and the life of my mother, father, and 2 sisters. They were good people." He had been working at the prison honor farm in Stringtown for 7 months prior to his parole, and since 1940 had been instrumental in inaugurating the annual prison rodeo and managing the rodeo stock. He also traveled throughout the state with the prison band as a trustee. Just before his release in May 1957, George wrote a letter to the Eye Opener, a publication of the state penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. It was printed under the headline, "Kimes Farewell." He had spent more than 30 years behind bars, and in his own words, he reflected on what that time had meant. The letter was equal parts humility, hard-earned wisdom, and the dry wit of a man who had finally outlasted his own legend. After more than 30 years of paying my debt to society, I can see the end of the trail, and a long and arduous one it has been. The bad could have been gooder, and the good could have been badder. I am glad that I have been able to endure it with my chin up, but a man may be laughing outwardly and crying inwardly. Only God and I know how futile these past years of my imprisonment have been. I hold no malice in my heart toward anyone. I still love my pets and flowers, as it has been common knowledge throughout the years. I'm looking forward to many years with them yet. That is, with the help of my wonderful wife's good cooking. Throughout the years, I have been known as Cousin George. So, a little advice. The best and healthiest way to do time is to try to keep your belly full, your bowels open, and your mouth shut. Soon after writing it, George Kimes walked out of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary as a free man for the first time in over 3 decades. George embraced his new life, taking charge of a herd of 154 cows, 110 calves, 50 heifers and steers, and 6 bulls. He also looked forward to his best summer sleeping in more than 3 decades, in air conditioning, a stark contrast to the uncomfortable cells, hot in the summer and cold in the winter. He revealed he had married a young woman minister, Fern, since his imprisonment, describing her as a good influence. Fern Kimes worked as a waitress, singer with evangelists, and a Pentecost Church of God minister during his incarceration. According to George, she could also drive a tractor as well as anyone, and was a top hand on the ranch. George valued his newfound autonomy, stating, "I believe the best thing about being out of prison is being on your own and making your own decisions." He still carried 8 bullet scars as a reminder of his criminal career. He also maintained a perverse pride in never revealing who his brother's bank-robbing partners were, a decision he claimed gave him great satisfaction and made him sure of his will to reform. He proudly stated, "I might have had a lighter sentence if I had told who they were, but I didn't. I have never told, and I never will." George's newfound freedom, however, was not entirely without incident. In December 1959, he was arrested in Lewiston, Ohio, on a charge of assault with a deadly weapon after a tavern fight. At the time, he was working as a vacuum cleaner salesman. He expressed a profound fear of returning to prison, stating he'd rather die than go back. The charge was ultimately dismissed in March 1960, as the construction worker he was accused of stabbing was only slightly injured and requested the charge be dropped. Perhaps that last brush with the law shook George, or perhaps the public and the press slowly forgot about the Kimes family. Whatever the reason, George lived the remainder of his life relatively quietly, with little more recorded in the newspapers about him. He passed away on January 3, 1970, at the age of 65, in Carmichael, California. He had been living and working at a turkey ranch in the Lincoln, California area for 2 years prior to his death. In George Kimes' obituary in 1970, both Nellie Ashford and Jackie Kimes Smith were listed as his surviving sisters, both living in Walla Walla, Washington. Not much is reported about them in their later years either. Jackie died in Washington in 1981, and Nellie passed away in Texas in 1987. The story of the Kimes family, spanning decades of audacious crime, desperate escapes, and profound personal tragedies, finally concludes its main chapter with the passing of George Kimes. From Matt's seductive, charming smile and phantom bandit exploits to George's quiet, artistic pursuits and his poignant reflections from behind bars, their lives were a complex tapestry of defiance, loyalty, and the relentless pursuit of a freedom that always seem just out of reach. Though their names once crimsoned a chapter in Sooner history, the Kimes Saga is not merely a tale of outlaws. It is a raw, unvarnished look at the devastating impact of choices, the enduring burden of a notorious name, and the human cost of lives lived beyond the walls of the law. Cornelius, Lily, George, Matt, Lovey, Nellie, Jackie. They carried the indelible mark of the Kimes name, a name that, for generations, echoed through the headlines and the collective memory of Oklahoma. Their story stands as a chilling reminder that even after the headlines fade and the gunshots fall silent, the echoes of notoriety can linger on, a permanent mark on the landscape of American history. Season 1 of Dust Toll has reached its end, but the story doesn't rest in peace. For subscribers, 2 hidden chapters remain. In The Unseen Hand, we follow the brothers behind the prison walls, into a world of favors, secrets, and a killing that may have been sanctioned from within. And in Where Did All the Money Go?, we trace the funds that the Kimes gang stole, worth millions today, and ponder a potential treasure hunt for unfound riches that may still be hidden in the Oklahoma and Arkansas hills. Both exclusive bonus episodes are available now for subscribers on Spotify.
I will sing a little song, but it ain't very long, about a lazy farmer wouldn't hoe his corn, and why it was I never could tell, for that young man was always well. That young man was always well. He planted his corn on June the last. In July it was up to his eye. In September there came a big frost, and all that young man's corn was lost. All that young man's corn was lost. He started to the field and he got that last. The grass and the weeds was up to his chin. The grass and the weeds had grown so high, it caused that poor man for to sigh. Caused that poor man for to sigh.
This has been Dust Toll, the story of the Kimes family. It is a true story meticulously drawn from the newspaper accounts of the era, offering a raw, unvarnished look at the lives of the Kimes family members. This series was written, narrated, and produced by Darren Racy. For more information, visit our website at dusttoll.com.